Hello and welcome to Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara, Week 1, Episode 1. We've just finished watching the very first episode of Santa Barbara. Today is July 30th, 2019, exactly 35 years after it originally aired.
And do you remember watching this 35 years ago?
I do. I remember some of the scenes, some of the dialogue, so I suspect I may have kept some of the audio recordings too.
Oh.
I have recently found a cassette tape that says Santa Barbara number 23.
Oh boy.
So if I find number 1, I'll probably find some dialogue from the pilot on it. So I was probably testing out my ability to record the show when for the coming week when I was going to be working. So. And we watched it about 16 years ago. I think maybe when YouTube was young, we had found a very
I vaguely remember
bad copy of it. It was when we lived at Beach Tower, so it must have been 16 years ago. And so you probably don't remember much about that. But
that is probably why I was able to identify the prison blues that he was wearing in the preview.
That could be.
Yeah.
So it started out Santa Barbara, 1979, with open establishing shot of the Capwell Mansion. We spent much of the episode in several places in the Capwell Mansion, the large atrium where they were having the engagement party for Kelly Capwell and Peter Flint. And then we also saw a corridor leading to the study several times, and then we saw the study. In the opening scene, which took place in 1979, the Capwells were having another party. I'm not quite sure what that party was for. Do you recall?
No, it was. I don't recall either. But it was a very fancy dress party.
And so, in the opening scene, the butler Philip brings a note to Channing Capwell, C.C. Capwell's namesake, Channing Creighton Capwell third, and we get to see him walk through the corridor to the study, and then he walks into the study, and then someone is sitting in the chair, and they spin around and shoot Channing dead.
Yes.
So that is how it starts, 5 years before the show actually started.
But before he goes down that corridor, he does briefly stop to talk to
Santana.
And she's a maid, it looks like.
She's a maid, yes.
Yeah.
Santana's, or she's at least working as a maid. We saw later in the show Danny Andrade telling Ted that he had to hurry to Kelly's engagement party because his mom, Rosa, who's also a maid there, has pressed him into working at the party. So Santana may just have been pressed into service for that party. I don't know if she was it's permanently
not clear.
A maid at the Capwell house or just the maid's daughter who needed some extra money. But clearly she and Channing had something going.
Yes.
And then Channing is murdered. And then we cut to 5 years later, Joe Perkins is doing chin-ups in the prison yard. And the warden and the guard come out, and the guard is heard to say, "But didn't he kill that boy?" So he's very worried that the parole board has let Joe Perkins out, whereas the warden seems to be happy that the parole board has let Joe Perkins out. He's really quite happy. This guy, I guess, has been in prison for 5 years, so he must have been arrested immediately after the murder and been in jail during the whole trial.
It must have been quite a fast trial, too, yeah.
Well, he may have been in jail for that whole trial, but yeah, with someone like C.C. Capwell against you, they probably raced through the trial, probably knew the judge. But yet somehow the warden seems to think 5 years is good enough for Joe. So I don't know if the warden believes he's innocent.
We don't really know the circumstances of what the legal grounds were for him being paroled. Yeah.
So cut to Mason Capwell and Cece in the study, and Cece is very upset that Mason messed up the parole hearing. So I guess Mason was supposed to have spoken at that hearing. After showing Joe at the yard, the theme song, the opening theme.
And that to me was really interesting because if you look at the opening and the logo for Santa Barbara, it's got this big sort of arch on it, and that's where we see that arch shape comes from the courtyard of the Capwell mansion, I guess, because they have arches all over their courtyard.
Now, this theme song was a lot different from all other soap operas on the air at the time, as far as I'm aware. This was a peppy, exciting theme that hadn't been written in the 30s and wasn't played on an organ.
Yeah.
I remember really liking that song when I first heard it, and I've liked it the 2,137 times I've heard it since then.
And they really play up the Santa Barbara, the scenery, the beach, the people lying on a beach. So it's very California.
And then after the theme, we cut back to the Capwell mansion again, and this time another party's happening exactly 5 years later, and it's Kelly and Peter's engagement party.
Right.
And then Philip arrives with a note for Mason. So it's very ominous. Mason goes into the study, and we're worried he's going to, be shot, just like Channing was. But Mason arrives and it's CC in the study, and he's smoking a cigar. That's when he blames Mason for lousing up the parole hearing. Now, Joe takes a while to pack up at the prison, but the warden seems to, like him, tells him he probably shouldn't go back to Santa Barbara. Joe says, I'm just going to go back to Santa Barbara.
Yeah, he keeps saying, I'm going to go home.
I got to find the killer. I got to find the real killer.
Yeah.
So I think we believe Joe when he says he's not the real killer. No one else in Santa Barbara appears to believe that. Everyone else seems to think he's the real killer, although
we don't know the evidence.
Someone does not want him to come back to Santa Barbara very strongly. Perhaps that person knows who the real killer is and doesn't want Joe snooping around. So there's a mysterious lady in a bathroom
with long red fingernails and a lot of rings on her hand.
And she calls some thugs that she has on speed dial.
Yeah.
Her two thugs, and says, go and make sure Joe doesn't come back to Santa Barbara. And she really sounded like she expected them to kill Joe. Though later in the episode, after they've tried to kill Joe, she seems upset that they tried to kill Joe.
Yeah.
So, Joe spent some time on the bus. They're following the bus. Finally, when Augusta phones them and says, you got to do something, they try to shoot Joe. He ducks at the last second, and the window is blasted out of the bus. But the bus driver thinks they're probably after Joe. Doesn't quite have the heart to kick him out in the street, though, so Joe manages to convince the bus driver to keep going. He's got to get to Santa Barbara. So, meanwhile, Jade Perkins hears the news on the TV that her brother has been released from prison, and her mom's very excited about that, too. Dad shows up, doesn't seem quite as excited.
Yeah, he's very, I think he's surprised, but he's not really that happy that Joe's potentially coming back.
So not sure what is going on there. I don't think John Perkins is the real killer, though.
No.
That's probably not the reason. Okay. So, and then we see Laken Lockridge on her bike. And then we cut to the beach bar where Ted and Danny are talking about being late for the engagement party. Ted as the brother of Kelly, and Danny as someone who's going to be doing some serving at the party. Laken arrives, and Ted invites her to the party. She protests. She's not really dressed for it, etc., etc. But he and Danny manage to kind of manhandle her out of the beach bar with her bike. And the next thing we know, we see Ted is driving the bike, and Laken's kind of sitting on it, side saddle, and being driven. So she clearly doesn't mind hanging out with Ted Capwell. And eventually they end up just hanging out in the stables.
Right.
Because she's not dressed for the party. So Kelly finds them there at one point, wants to chat with Ted, but leaves them alone. So, meanwhile, at the main party, Kelly finds out from Cece that Joe Perkins has been released from jail.
Mm-hmm.
And this, this is her ex who's killed her brother.
Yeah.
So she's a little bit thrown by that, but she's taking it in stride, and she makes arrangements to, that CC's made arrangements that the helicopter's going to come and take him to the island.
Mm-hmm.
So she's happy with that. She's happy to leave things behind and not think about Joe Perkins coming back.
And the whole news of Joe Perkins coming back is it's this huge source of gossip, and it's almost like those old Breck ads where she tells two friends and he tells two friends and so on and so on. And that's how it goes. It's on the news. It's everyone's phoning everyone else to say that he's been released and he's potentially coming back. There's sort of footage of the bus making its way to Santa Barbara, and people are following it. So this is obviously huge news, and that maybe speaks to the power of the Capwells.
Well, I think we saw Mason on the phone at one point talking to someone. So
yeah.
He may have known some people in the media who were going to sort of stir up trouble so that Joe wouldn't be welcome when he got back into town. At one point during the show, Kelly and Joe started having music playing during their flashbacks.
Which I recognized. I didn't know who had done it, but I remember it was a popular song in the 80s.
So that was If Ever You're in My Arms Again by Peebo Bryson. I believe at the time I read that the record company and the producers of Santa Barbara, they were owned by the same parent company or something, and so as part of their synergy thing, they were actually actively cross-promoting Peebo Bryson as an up-and-coming singer. So I think we may hear that song again. Ted and Lakin briefly got a song playing while they were dancing, so I don't know if that's something we'll be hearing again either. It kind of sounded familiar, but I don't know the name of it.
Maybe they'll play it up a little more and we'll recognize it.
And then the media are at the gates of the Capwell mansion. They're there to report on this almost royal wedding type frenzy of Kelly's engagement party.
Yeah.
And then suddenly we see a Rolls Royce, and there's an old lady who's very upset that they've stopped the car, and it's the media that are blocking the road in front of the Capwell mansion. So clearly she needs to drive past the Capwell house to get home, and so she's pretty annoyed by that. And then
a wealthy, grumpy neighbor.
And then we see her on the phone, and she identifies herself as Mrs. T. McDonald Lockridge. The T stood for Tiger. And she calls the police to say there's a very loud party next door, and they better come and arrest CC Capwell. So the police actually do arrive at the party, and CC knows one of the police officers by name.
It's very wink, wink,
Bert.
nudge, nudge that they're not going to arrest CC Capwell.
He tells them to go tell her that they read him the riot act, and then as soon as they leave, he tells Philip to turn up the music so that people with their windows closed could hear it. So the Lockridges and the Capwells don't get along.
So that's something we learned.
But yet Ted and Lakin are dating.
That could be a source.
This could be some sort of
problems.
Lockridge and Capulet type thing that's being happening here. The two warring families, kids getting together. When Ted brings Lakin home, he's just about to kiss her at the front door when Minx opens the door. And she's got a riding crop in her hand, and she wants just to smack Ted on the shoulder.
Yeah. So no love lost between the two families, obviously.
So, crusty old Minx Lockridge. We'll see if she has a heart. So, meanwhile, we've forgotten to talk about Santana. When she finds out, she overhears the news, so when she's near the study that Joe's coming back, she promptly steals one of Cece's handguns and makes her way to her apartment, where her mother follows her. Her mother, Rosa, notices she's upset, but she goes, no, I'm busy, I gotta go. She runs out with the gun, and then Rosa follows her, And the next thing you see, she's at the bus station with the gun in her hand.
Yeah, everyone ends up at the bus station.
Jade and Marissa Perkins end up at the bus station waiting for Joe. Rosa does show up looking for Santana, but she hasn't seen her yet by the end of the episode. And the bus arrives, and Joe is still flashbacking on Kelly a bit, but he sees all these protesters out there. Meanwhile, Kelly and Peter are in a helicopter, and then Kelly starts having some Joe Perkins flashbacks as If Ever You're in My Arms Again plays, and Joe and Kelly alternate having flashbacks about each other, and then Kelly looks out the window and she's flying over the bus station!
Yes.
Just as Joe is getting off the bus, so
and looking up.
Seems like she may see Joe there, and Joe looks up and sees the helicopter. He knows that Kelly is in that helicopter.
Yeah.
I guess it's the Capwell helicopter. So.
Yeah, he recognizes it, obviously.
Yeah. So, do you think he'll ever have her in his arms again?
Oh, I'm quite sure he will. She didn't seem overly interested, actually, in her fiancé.
So Peter Flint, Ted mentions, is his physics teacher at Lyman Prep. Mm-hmm. And he later mentions to CC that he's worked there for 6 years. So he's clearly quite a bit older than Kelly, who's, I think, our age. I think she was 18 in 1984. So, yeah, who knows how she ended up meeting Peter Flint and how they ended up engaged, but she seems like, she's fine with them going off together, and there's no reason to believe that there's anything that will stop that wedding.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I wouldn't be too sure about that.
I'm sure they'll be married for years to come. And at one point, Cece talks to Peter about his future. It says, even though you're not married yet, I consider you a son if you'd like to join Capwell Enterprises. And he talks a bit about the history of Capwell Enterprises, that his father and grandfather built it up. Mm-hmm. So there's, Cece is obviously really into history. He's named his second son, Channing, after himself and after his father. Mm-hmm. So he's, clearly very gung-ho about the family history. Although, perhaps Mason might wonder why Channing was named after him and not him. Yeah.
Well, there's obviously a bit of resentment there on the part of the older brother, even before the younger one is murdered. And there's obviously still a little bit of lingering resentment, even years after the younger brother has died. So this is an ongoing issue, clearly.
Mm-hmm. Mason was teasing Channing about all the girlfriends he had.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, but is it possible that there was some girl that they both liked, and Channing ended up with her? So, when we saw those trailers for Santa Barbara, Santana mentioned that they took her baby.
So we don't know much about that yet, but I'm sure that will be discussed further.
We know she seemed to be dating Channing, so there could be something there. What else do we know from the trailers? Well, Mason said his family didn't really love him that much. I mean, he and Cece seemed to get along pretty good, other than Cece blaming him for Joe Perkins getting parole.
Yeah.
But, Kelly didn't seem to have a problem with him. I don't know, did they have a scene together? Kelly
they did, very briefly, yeah.
Yeah. And they mentioned Ted, who was in the barn the whole time, and they mentioned their sister Eden twice, but Eden
which we didn't see her
party,
at all.
So.
Yeah.
And that was it for family members that they mentioned. So, no indication of where the mother is at this point. She's clearly was not introduced. There weren't any old enough ladies in the crowd that might have been her, and you'd think she would have been next to Cece if she was around. So that's a mystery. Where's the mother?
Yeah.
And what else? Oh, Jade Perkins, you might recognize Missy Brennan as the girl who plays...
She looked really familiar. I wasn't sure who she was.
She plays Jennifer on Days of Our Lives.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can see that a little bit.
And, of course, C.C. Capwell was not played by Lloyd Bochner. He was played by Peter Mark Richmond.
who you may or may not recognize from the early seasons of Dynasty.
He played Andrew Laird, the lawyer of Blake Carrington, and he actually, I think, went back to Dynasty after this, because we saw Andrew in the later seasons.
Yeah,
I remember. So he's almost as gruff as Lloyd Bochner.
Yeah.
He was a good
he's
a good replacement.
And he too, if you watch a lot of shows from the 60s and 70s, he was also a frequent guest star in a lot of them, and also played a lot of villains, like Lloyd Bochner did. So there is some similarities there too. And
then, of course, Robin Wright was Kelly Capwell, and her acting didn't seem to be quite as bad as I remember, so maybe I was misremembering that, but we'll see. So both she and Joe Perkins, hadn't acted much, but they're probably, I'm sure, Ted and Danny hadn't done much acting either. I'm sure there were a lot of the younger kids. Missy Brennan probably was her first role. So we'll do, once a week, we'll do a in-depth, more in-depth research on one actor per week. So later in the week, we'll pick someone to do. We did a mini in-depth on Lloyd Bochner in the last episode. So maybe not that depth, but just a little summary of their career.
One of the things I noticed watching this, especially if you compare it to some of the modern soap operas, is just how lavishly photographed it was, and how many scenes were outdoors, how many scenes were huge, had a lot of extras. There's one particularly beautiful scene, I thought, when the engagement is officially announced and they release all of these balloons, and there's this really wide shot of them coming out of the top of this mansion, that I'm sure most soap operas today wouldn't be able to afford even that one scene, let alone an entire hour of those kind of scenes.
And they may have had a little more money for the pilot, because that exterior shot of the Capwell Mansion, I don't remember ever seeing again. And then the gates, that may well be the only time we've ever seen the gates. The Lockridge Mansion, we've so far been relegated to the living room when Minx was on the phone, and the front door. But I think the Lockridge Mansion was never quite as extravagant as the Capwell Mansion. So I don't think we see too many more rooms of the Lockridge Mansion. So
the other thing I just thought, plot-wise, just a little bit curious, was the bus ride up with Joe slowly making his way up to Santa Barbara. And of course, when the thugs first accost him, they don't try and kill him or anything. They try to persuade him by beating him to take a bus to San Francisco instead of Santa Barbara. It did occur to me that any bus going to San Francisco would probably stop in Santa Barbara, so it might have just been easier for him to have gotten on the San Francisco bus. And
I've always pictured him as being north of Santa Barbara for some reason.
Oh, okay.
The prison.
Oh,
I don't know why. Maybe it's the direction the bus was shown traveling, and I just felt the ocean was on the left or whatever. But I've always thought it was north. But I guess there's no real reason to believe that based on
where's San Quentin? Because he's supposed to be in San Quentin.
It was in San Quentin? Yeah, San Quentin. We'll look up where San Quentin is, and we'll mention it in episode 2. So,
also, it did seem a little curious, and it's just nitpicking here, but when the thugs do shoot out the bus, and this bus has got a whole window missing, and it's really, I just thought it was kind of interesting that all of the passengers except Joe opt to get off the bus, because I think most people, if there's people shooting at you from outside, would not opt.
No, I would urge the bus driver to continue on to a safer place. So. Yeah.
So that was just.
Now I'm just looking did a little research as to what was going on in the world on July 30th, 1984. So the Summer Olympics were airing on ABC that year. Now, I'm familiar with the Olympics being on NBC. I think they've had them for like 30 years, but I guess ABC, which was the Wide World of Sports network, was showing them that year. So a lot of people would have been watching the Olympics during this week.
Didn't they emphasize that the son who was killed was actually an athlete? An accomplished
Perhaps.
athlete.
I may have
so I
been
wonder if
typing
that sort of ties in with the Olympic
point.
spirit that would have been going on at that time.
He's the golden boy.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's clearly
and literally
based on
too,
his hair.
because he's got very blonde hair, and he's obviously his father's favorite.
Yes. And so in the movies, Meatballs Part 2 came out the Friday before Santa Barbara premiered, as did Purple Rain.
Oh.
And possibly still in the theaters, Cannonball Run 2, Muppets Take Manhattan.
So a lot of sequels.
And then released in June, Ghostbusters, Star Trek 3, and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Oh, wow. Some big movies.
And the number one album? Any guesses?
Oh, I guess Thriller wouldn't still be on the charts.
It was not Thriller, but that was earlier in the year. It was Born in the USA.
Oh, okay. I was going to
third
actually
week
guess
in the charts,
Madonna.
I believe. So we'll take one episode every week to update you on popular culture of the day.
If we have our research on hand.
Yep. Any other famous actors in this? Well, Dame Judith Anderson played Minx Lockridge. And there was a big deal about that on Entertainment Tonight, even though I'd never heard of her.
Oh.
So when we come to do the deep dive into the career of Dame Judith Anderson, we'll find out why she was such a big deal.
Her.
And so, any thoughts on the mystery long-haired, long-finger, red-finger lady?
No, but I was thinking as I was watching it that they were maybe playing off the popularity of the Alexis Carrington character a little bit on Dynasty, and just obviously we haven't seen the character yet, so I don't even know what she looks like, but just the idea of this sort of villainous, sinister femme fatale type with these long red fingernails and all this jewelry, it seemed very, very much influenced by Alexis Carrington. So that was my take on it.
I have a general sense that the show was influenced by Dynasty.
Well, it had as its first two choices for C.C. Capwell were Dynasty veterans. So that's one parallel right there.
And, that's about all I can think of to say on this episode.
I think so. I think it's off to a good start.
Yeah, we'll watch episode 2 tomorrow and record another commentary. And depending on how long these commentaries are, I was planning to bundle them into five episode podcast. But if they get too long, we might upload daily ones just because I noticed how long the one from yesterday took to upload to YouTube. So
we are perfecting our format.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and we'll be back tomorrow, and you'll see us at least within a week for the next episode of Santa Barbara. Bye.
Bye-bye.